Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 251, the Alberta Investment Act. The bill would create a new management structure for the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund. Two new funds would be created out of the existing fund structure. The Alberta Income Fund would be designed to provide Albertans with a future source of income. The Economic Diversification Fund, the second part, would be used to encourage the creation of new businesses in Alberta and to diversify the economy of Alberta from its dependence on agriculture and energy.
The honourable member for Westlock Sturgeon has moved first reading to Bill 251, an act to amend the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Act. Does the Assembly agree with this motion for first reading? Opposed? So ordered.
Bill number 251, an act to amend the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Taylor, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to file and table respectively the report of the West Edmonton Mall roller coaster inquiry and the annual reports of the Department of Labour and the Human Rights Commission for the period 1st of April 1986 to 31st of March 1987.
Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the answer to motion number 211. Motion for return 211.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Lethbridge West, followed by Solicitor General.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague for Lethbridge East and myself, I should like to introduce to you, Mr. Speaker, and to members of the House, two special guests to the legislature today. They're seated in your gallery. First one, Mr. Speaker, is Mr. Dennis O'Connell, the chairman of the board of the University of Lethbridge. And the second one is the new president of the University of Lethbridge, coming from Saskatchewan, Dr. Howard Tennant. I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that members join with me in welcoming these guests to the Alberta Legislature.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the Assembly 36 grade 10 students from the Daysland High School. They are seated in the members' gallery, and they're escorted by their teacher, Mr. Openshaw, and by two parents, Harvey Benke and Shirley Snyder. I'd ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président, Mr. Speaker, j'ai le plaisir aujourd'hui de vous introduire et à tous les membres députés de l'Assemblée législative, les chefs francophones de l'Alberta qui sont ici aujourd'hui pour donner un message au gouvernement de l'Alberta sur l'affaire Piquet. Je voudrais qu'après qu'ils se lèvent debout et faire applaudir, je veux reconnaître aujourd'hui de Fort McMurray, M. Roland Petru, président de la régionale d'Edmonton, Lydia Roy, présidente de la régionale d'Edmonton, François Millotte, vice-président,
au Villa Morissette et Viviane Baudouin. De Morinville-le-Gal, Henri Luçon, Michel Lavoie et Germain Portier. Des jeunes francophones, entrepreneurs francophones, Paul Blais, Christine Blais et Alain Lavoie. De la faculté Saint-Jean, Marcel Ouellette. De Saint-Paul, Gérald Dubé, Simone Robinson, Fernand Bergeron. De Plamondon, from Plamondon, my hometown, Tracy Gauthier, Isabelle Marcure et Normand Ménard. Et la francophonie jeunesse de l'Alberta, Daniel Dallaire. De Bonnyville, Thérèse Dallaire, Serge Lavoie, Paul Lamoureux, Mac Lamoureux, Mac Champagne. Et de l'école Maurice Lavallée, Joël Roy, et de l'école J.F. Picard, Carole Godette. Et de tous les autres membres qui sont venus ici aujourd'hui pour m'applaudir. I would like these Francophone leaders and others who came today to please stand and receive the warm applause from this assembly.
The Associate Minister of Agriculture, followed by the Minister of Community and Occupational Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure today to introduce 53 grade 6 students from the Evergreen Elementary School in my constituency. They are accompanied by teachers Mrs. Corona Bauer and Roger Smeeland, and parents Linda Peronto, Barb Payton, and Martha McCulley. Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of attending the official opening of a renovated school out there last week. I know that the pupils will enjoy learning in this new renewed facility, and I'd like them to stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce a friend and a visitor to our Assembly from the constituency of Calgary-Shaw. Mrs. Zuda Davies is here for meetings of the Social Care Facilities Review Committee, on which she is a member. I'd ask her to rise and ask all members to give her a warm welcome to the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, last year, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission brought in a ruling which is detrimental to Alberta producers, to at least $200 million and possibly up to $400 million. Mr. Speaker, after the trade deal, the Mulroney trade deal was signed, the U.S. producers took action to extend the FERC tolls to a wider range of Alberta gas products. Mr. Speaker, when I asked the Premier about the impact of the FERC decision last May the 22nd, he said, and I quote, "I'm convinced that any true comprehensive trade agreement between our two countries will in fact eliminate that kind of harassment at the border. As I said in the House, if we are not able to do those kinds of things, then I would expect that the trade agreement will not be worth being a part of." Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier, will he acknowledge that the FERC decision has not been overturned by the Mulroney trade deal?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we dealt with this very matter yesterday, and as I said, the trade agreement, which comes into effect on January the 1st, 1989, will deal with FERC. FERC will be subject to the trade agreement, dispute settling mechanism. And that's exactly what I said previously.
Mr. Speaker, then the Premier acknowledges that that FERC decision is still there. My question is, he acknowledges that FERC decision is still there in 1989, and it could cost our producers from $200 to $400 million in the next 2 years.
Mr. Speaker, there's some argument about the cost, but it's true, as I said yesterday, again, in the same question, that the agreement is not retroactive.
Then, Mr. Speaker, why is it then that the Premier is still so enthusiastically supporting this accord when he said back and answered a couple times that if this wasn't settled, he wouldn't support the agreement. Why is he still supporting it then?
That's right. Because, as I said yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and I say again now, because FERC will now be subject to the trade agreement after January the 1st, 89, and that they will not be able to conduct this kind of harassment after that time.
Mr. Speaker, so we acknowledge there may be a lot of producers out of business by 1989, but let's look at the Premier's statement. Will he give us some evidence of why he believes after January the 1st, 1989, that there will no longer be FERC decision, because nobody else has that interpretation? What is he basing his evidence on?
Mr. Speaker, as far as Alberta producers out of business, it's obvious that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has a much lower assessment of the ability of Alberta producers than I do. I think they are strong and getting stronger. However, in terms of the trade agreement, it's clear that decisions of FERC, once the agreement is in place, will be subject to the dispute settling mechanism. And therefore, if we have a frivolous or political or harassing type of decision by FERC, it will be settled by the dispute settlement mechanism.
Supplementary, Calgary Buffalo.
Yes, I'm wondering whether the Premier might advise whether the specific $200 to $400 million tax in issue will itself be subject to the formal dispute settlement mechanism that's anticipated, or is it only future decisions of FERC after the effective date of the free trade agreement that will be subject to the dispute mechanism?
I've said twice now in the House, today and yesterday, that this agreement is not retroactive.
Member for Calgary Fish Creek, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this line of questioning today and the content of the questions and answers impact potentially on the oil industry in our province, I wonder if the Premier could indicate to the House whether he's had any formal or informal presentations made to him or the Minister of Energy on the part of that industry with respect to the FERC potential and other matters inherent in the agreement.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I've had an opportunity to meet with all the organizations in the energy industry, as has our Minister of Energy, and I must say that the vast majority of our energy producers in Alberta support this trade agreement very, very strongly.
Minister.
I'd like to emphasize, Mr. Speaker, that this province entered into those discussions with three primary objectives. One was to ensure that our resources would have assured markets in the United States, and that we would have an investment climate that would be conducive to the development of our oil and gas reserves in this province, and that we would preserve our proprietary rights and resource management powers. And, Mr. Speaker, all three of those have been maintained. The discussion on the FERC issue, Mr. Speaker, if we were not to have a trade agreement, then we would not have a way of dealing with FERC in the future. And with the trade agreement, we would have the ability to deal with FERC in the way the Premier has suggested. So we are far better off with a trade agreement with regard to regulatory matters than we were before.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and we all believe in the tooth fairy, too. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question to the member from Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are to the Treasurer. Reports from several sources have indicated that the recommendations of Harry Rose in 1973 and Mr. Jack Shortreed in 1976 had damaging things to say about the fiscal health of the principal group of companies and about the government's own regulations and conduct. So far, the government has consistently refused to make either of those documents public. Mr. Speaker, will the Treasurer now commit himself to tabling or filing these two reports in this Assembly at the earliest possible opportunity so Albertans can judge for themselves the contents of those documents?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think I've said on many occasions, and I know that the member from Kingsway is well aware that the code inquiry is in fact now underway. And obviously the court order from the Court of Queen's Bench of Alberta has suggested that if Mr. Code requires any specific documents which would assist him in determining or unraveling this problem, he has full opportunity to subpoena those documents. It would be, I think, a bit presumptuous of me to preempt what is in fact his responsibility in conducting his duties as described by the court. And I know that in order to provide a full public understanding of what took place in the principal affair, I would imagine that some of those documents which the member referred to would be evaluated and in fact, requested by Mr. Code. But I think it would be improper for me to preempt what in fact is Mr. Code's responsibility.
Okay. Well, if Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. There's certain responsibility upon the member asking the question as well. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the code inquiry was not going in 1973, and would the Treasurer deny that the main reason that he refuses to release those documents is because they would reveal the irresponsibility of the government of the day, which was a Conservative government, in ignoring that report, which said that Associated Investors of Canada should be wound up?
In which the question is framed is an admissible supplementary question.
Well, like I say, in 1973 there was no code inquiry. Will the Treasurer deny that the main reason that he won't release the short read report is not to protect the code inquiry, but to protect the government of the day that ignored it, and every successive government since? You've been in power for 2 years, that you have consistently ignored this far-sighted report's recommendations concerning the tightening up of the standards of financial reporting in this province, like the the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs also recommended.
Speaker, the government has made it very clear that we are not hiding anything, that we want full disclosure in this matter. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, that we have set in place an investigation into the Code affair, which has very wide powers, which has an opportunity to deal with the company, which has an opportunity to receive input from the contract holders and others, and certainly has full opportunity to review the responsibility of the government in this matter. I have made this abundantly clear to the House on several occasions, Mr. Speaker. The Premier and I have had an opportunity on a number of occasions to discuss this with the people of Alberta. They understand what is going on. It is unfortunate that the member from Kingsway does not. Let me make one final point, Mr. Speaker. It's 1973 is the point where the member is taking some reference. That is something like 15 years ago, Mr. Speaker. As I've said before, events change, circumstances change, and in fact, there was a very much change in our economy over that period. All of these events, Mr. Speaker, will be well disclosed to Mr. Code. It's incumbent upon him to come to the bottom of this matter and to make recommendations and to suggest what in fact happened. I'm sure that Mr. Code will carry out his responsibilities.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the people of Alberta certainly do know what's going on. It's a cover-up. Will the Treasurer deny that the persistent refusal to make public or to discuss the contents of these two documents is more designed to make it difficult for the public to assess the degree of negligence of the government?
Right on. Right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, once again, the member from Kingsway has fallen into the trap that the member from Strathcona fell into, wherein he suggested that because of some event there was a causal relation which put the government at risk. In fact, that is not the case, Mr. Speaker, and to make that quantum leap in conclusion is...
Let the provincial treasurers be seated until there's quiet in the House so the rest of us can hear what's happening, please.
Speaker, simply to conclude, as we've said before, it is the responsibility of Mr. Code to come to some conclusion as to responsibility. To simply suggest because there are a variety of reports or there was a prospectus which was unsatisfied, a variety of other items, and to conclude that there's some particular culpability attached to that is in fact faulty analysis. Mr. Code will come to his conclusions and he will draw his own conclusions, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we wait to hear from.
Main question, Westlock Sturgeon. Oh, I see. Supplementary, Calgary Buffalo.
I'm wondering whether the minister will tell this House, yes or no, was there a 1976 report by Mr. Shortreed with respect to the financial industry, or is he going to continue this disgraceful display of stonewalling on basic information to this House?
Mr. Speaker, it's unfortunate the member from Buffalo does not seem fit to conduct himself in the usual fashion that he does. The simple fact is that we are now providing all the information possible to Mr. Code. We have given a very careful consideration and commitment that we, in fact, will respond in any way possible to Mr. Code and to his inquiry. And that is now ordered by the court, Mr. Speaker. And we have said before that if Mr. Code is conducting his responsibility with the dispatch that I think he will, it is in fact our responsibility to listen to his requests and to respond to his answers. And that's exactly how we'll operate, Mr. Speaker. For the member to Buffalo to suggest that we're stonewalling or avoiding the issue is in fact wrong.
Chair now recognizes Westlock Sturgeon.
I was just doing a delayed reaction, Mr. Speaker, getting up. I may direct my first question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, who is so neatly attired in a liberal-colored shirt today. Mr. Speaker, as you know, there has been a number of financial failures in the last number of years, a host of them, in fact, and the last of which was the principal group, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that you're quite aware of. Now, it seems to me, Mr. Speaker, it would be quite reasonable to expect a responsible government would be making every effort to make sure, in light of these unfolding events, that the regulation and the staffing of the responsible departments have been looked after. The first question, Mr. Speaker, is would the Minister please indicate to the Assembly when a chairman for the Alberta Securities Commission will be appointed, considering that this vacancy has been present since March the 15th, 1987.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you'll notice that I am also wearing black in recognition that we are in mourning for the Liberal point of view on free trade and other such important matters. Regarding the position of the chairman of the Alberta Securities Commission, which is being advertised and actively recruited for now at the moment, in conjunction with the position, a newly created position, which would be of equal status, that is the Chief of Securities Administration, that we have been recruiting to since October. About the middle of October, you will recall that I had a ministerial advisory committee and then a discussion paper to restructure the Alberta Securities Commission. And when the former chairman left, it was sometime, I believe, in April this year, we wanted to wait before we recruited to a permanent position in light of the fact that we were expecting to restructure the Securities Commission. In the meantime, we have been very ably assisted by an acting chairman who has been a member of the board for some years, and that position is continued to be filled on that basis.
Mr. Speaker, I can't quite understand why it should be open since March, unless there is a shortage of Tory patronage appointments out there. Could the minister tell the Assembly whether or not she expects to receive the additional $1 million she admitted is crucial for the administration of the Alberta Securities Department? What has been your success? Oh, I see the Treasurer is going to have an answer to that. Maybe he would care. He hasn't answered any other question to date. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, firstly, let me indicate what the process for selection is. It is a competition. There is a selection panel which will bring forward recommendations. The members of the selection panel are Chip Collins, the former Deputy Treasurer, Dr. Mellon, who is Deputy Minister of Executive Council, Bill Welton, who is Chairman of the Alberta Stock Exchange, Sally Hall, who is President of the Canadian Association of Consumers, and Esther Ondracht, who is Chief Financial Officer of Chieftain here in Edmonton. To the second question, may I point out that a special warrant has recently been passed in the order of $1.5 million, which will assist us in beefing up the Securities Commission for the balance of this budget year. I cannot at this point predict what my persuasive powers will manage to convince Treasury Board to let me have for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish you well. I hope he doesn't stonewall you the same he has us. Mr. Speaker, This question to the provincial treasurer, since he has been hollering the answers over his shoulder at the minister, that maybe he will care to answer a few himself. Could the treasurer then indicate to the House when a superintendent of insurance will be appointed, considering that this vacancy has been open since February of '87? When is he going to make the appointment?
Yeah, you should take the insurance side.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, the Superintendent of Insurance position is in the Department of Consumer and Corporate Affairs. At the present time, we have 2 acting superintendents of insurance, one to handle the insurance side of the portfolio, which is in my department still, one which has been and has been since before the Investment Contracts Act and the responsibility for the administration of that was moved, which was prior to May 26, 1986. That is another acting position until such time as we have had an opportunity to fully think through the change of regulatory system in Alberta impacting on all of these items. It appears that we cannot legally have one superintendent reporting to 2 ministers, and so what we have done is left 2 acting superintendents, one who reports to me on insurance matters and one who reports to the provincial treasurer. When that matter can be resolved, and it is a legislative change that is required, then we will be appointing the acting superintendent of insurance from the insurance point of view to that position.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The wonderful set of actors there. Now, could the treasurer, this last question, Mr. Speaker, is to the treasurer. Could he tell the Assembly whether his tardiness or incompetence and lack of appointing a provincial controller, this is a position that has been vacant since early summer, is this a reflection on his commitment to financial management of this government that he has still not appointed a controller?
As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the controller will be appointed tomorrow.
Supplementary, Edmonton Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs, has the government considered putting the regulatory functions back together again from the Treasury and Consumer and Corporate Affairs under one department instead of leaving them split as they split them earlier?
I don't think that the honourable member's question is directed in quite the right way. We have the insurance responsibility in Consumer and Corporate Affairs. We have Securities Commission in Securities and Corporate Consumer and Corporate Affairs, and that doesn't seem to me to be an unwieldy arrangement whatsoever.
For Little Bow, followed by Highwood, followed by Edmonton Calder, followed by Cardston, Red Deer North, Edmonton Gold Bar, Edmonton Avamore, Grand Prairie, Edmonton Beverly.
If you can shorten up the answers, we'll get there.
Mr. Speaker, question to the provincial treasurer. The provincial treasurer commented as of yesterday with regards to his concern about the confidentiality of tax information, and had indicated that that matter would be reviewed as to whether the province has any jurisdiction over that area and could put proper legislation in place. Could the minister indicate whether that is possible and what's going to happen?
Mr. Speaker, I was commenting yesterday when asked about whether I believe there was a problem in terms of confidentiality of some tax information, and I think most people in Canada, if not Alberta, believe that if they go to somebody for tax preparation, that it is assumed, in fact, almost a principle, a postulate, I guess, that in fact that information is confidential. Certainly with respect to professions, that's the case. With respect to the tax department, I think also that is the case. And I would expect that most people would want to see that happen with respect to others who prepare tax information, tax returns. I guess, Mr. Speaker, there has been some controversy over the past couple of years, primarily with respect to the tax discounters, with respect to the confidentiality of that information. I wouldn't assume that they were essentially in the preparation of tax information. They were probably more in the business of loaning money, but nonetheless there was client confidentiality involved. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, there's some interest among others provinces. Just recently we met in Vancouver to discuss similar issues, that of tax preparation, and in fact that matter of financial planners, whether or not it's necessary to regulate those. And in the context of both of that, my department is now looking at ways in which we can improve and ensure that confidentiality does exist in terms of tax preparation.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary is to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs in the very same vein. The Minister also made comments yesterday that she would review her legislation in terms of protection of consumers. Could the Minister indicate what those findings have been to this point and whether legislation will be necessary in her department?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department now administers on behalf of the federal government the tax discounting side of this question. We do license tax discounters, and primarily for the purpose of maintaining a reasonable discount rate for the transaction that they conduct. The questions that the honourable member is asking, however, are a little broader in their implication. Several months ago, I appointed a committee called the Committee on Fair Dealing, and I am having them review the financial services industry from a customer or a consumer or an investor's point of view in an attempt to come to terms with the new marketplace conditions that exist today in Alberta, in Canada, and in North America. One of the issues, as always, is on taking unfair advantage of purchasers, and in the financial services industry, that is a very real and crucial question. One of the ways that can be taken advantage of a consumer is by using personal information without the knowledge or consent of that consumer, and that is the case, I think, that has been identified here. That sort of question will be addressed by that committee in context. They have not reported to me yet. They are expected to report by January 1st, 1988.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary to the Provincial Treasurer, and it's with regards to the federal government's responsibility in this matter. Will the Minister take it upon himself to make a written presentation or representation to the federal government, first of all, condemning the practice, secondly, asking for action to stop it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure, as you've indicated, as the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs has as well indicated, this is a matter of priority to us. We will use our best efforts to ensure that regulatory reform is in place, and I do appreciate the recommendation from the member from Little Bow as to a suggested action with respect to the federal government.
Final supplementary, Little Bow. Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs: has it occurred to the Minister to bring these questions of rules and ethics and procedures under the umbrella of the Unfair Trade Practices Act, so that the standards for sales people of securities is at least as high as the standards for used car salesmen?
Well, sir, I'm not sure I would use that as the standard. We are, however, looking at it from the consumer's point of view, and we think that there are three essential elements in a larger picture that have to be ensured in the regulatory framework. One is disclosure, adequate disclosure that can be understood by the consumer. One is competency of the players in the marketplace, the sellers and advisors. And one, of course, is the safeguards on the quality of the investment. Those three elements will have to be present in the main, and whether one does it under the Unfair Trade Practices Act, which is done in some places, or whether it's done under the Securities Act, or whether it's done under some other legislation, those are questions that are being looked at now. I haven't got those answers, and I don't expect to have a final recommendation until sometime in the spring.
Member for Highwood, followed by the member for Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister of Recreation and Parks. To follow up on the Minister's announcement a week ago to keep Highway 40 open most of the winter to help eliminate traffic problems during the Olympic Games, may I offer him first, Mr. Speaker, my heartiest congratulations and suggest to him that the good people of the constituents of Highwood, McLeod, Cardston, Pincher Creek, Crow's Nest, Tabor Warner, and Little Bow will be forever beholden to him. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, will all the added costs to keep this beautiful highway open be the responsibility of the provincial government, or will our municipal or improvement districts have to be involved?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my thanks to the honourable member for his compliments. And first I should, and to the members of the opposition, I should provide a little background, Mr. Speaker, in that as the minister responsible for the Olympic Secretariat, the request originated through my office from the Olympic Coordinating Committee to keep the highway open during the Olympics. There are several ministries involved with regards to that request, and we had joint consultation and reviewed such areas as safety concerns to provide alternate access routes and others. And in doing so, some of the specifics, Mr. Speaker, should really be directed to those ministers responsible. So I defer it to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, and there may be supplementaries as well from the other departments that were involved.
Mr. Speaker, the costs of keeping Highway 40, a primary highway in the province of Alberta, open would primarily be borne by the Department of Transportation and Utilities. And I might point out that the decision of the government was to keep it open from today, December 1, 1987, to February 29th, 1988. And we assume that that cost may be somewhere, anywhere, depending on the amount of snow that may fall, between $50,000 and $250,000, somewhere in that range. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, that most of the snow would fall on Mount Elk.
Mr. Speaker, there's very little has fallen yet, but in a supplementary question to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, is it the Minister's intention to keep the road open for the benefit of our southern citizens and southern neighbours for the following year and, well, let's say for all the years thereafter?
At the present time, Mr. Speaker, there was a number of requests that were made to us on the Southern Alberta Cabinet Tour for the keeping of the road open for the periods beyond February 29th, 1988. At the present time, our decision was to keep the road open from December 1 of 87 to February the 29th of 1988, and beyond that, only time and some decisions that will be made down the road will tell.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Forestry, Lands and Wildlife. Do you, Mr. Minister, anticipate any real negative impact with regard to wildlife concerns in the summit area or in the Highwood Valley below during this period?
Mr. Speaker, in my review of the situation, I felt that yes, there was some legitimate concerns there that could be raised by individuals, and I have taken 6 steps really to mitigate against those concerns. Examples would be establishing what would be called intercept feeding so that the elk that are in the area would stay in that particular spot. And I'll be monitoring the elk population by ground and by air and by random patrols, and also having extra people have a look there to make sure that nothing happens. I'll also be taking steps like making sure the Minister of Transportation doesn't put any salt on the road in that area so that the elk go to the road to eat the salt and create a hazard in that way. There will also, the Minister of Transportation agreed to put zoning, speed zones in there, and also proper signing to slow the traffic down. But I think one of the more important things that I was able to do, and it's effective today in fact, is a wildlife control zone. And that covers the entire area right from, I think it's from the Highwood Pass, Highwood Junction, to the Peter Lougheed Provincial Park, and to the BC border, and up to the Highwood Range. And that wildlife control area prevents any foot access or vehicle access off the highway right-of-way, except for 2 trappers who are licensed to trap in that area. Anyone who, whether they be native or white or whoever, that goes into that area either by foot or by vehicle during this period that the road will be open will move with prosecution, because it's, we want to make sure we've taken every step we can to protect the wildlife and the environment.
Westlock Sturgeon,
It flows through the question to the Minister of Wildlife. Has the Minister of Wildlife, in view of the fact that the native population are supposed to have the rights to hunt out of season, and they are in this area, this road makes these elk herds accessible, has the Minister met with the natives in the area to work out some sort of systems whereby our elk herds or herds wintering there will not be decimated?
Mr. Speaker, no, I didn't meet with them, but if the member was listening to what I just said, a wildlife control area prevents anyone from hunting in that area. They can't even access it by foot or by any vehicle. So I think the whole area and the elk herd is protected.
Gary, unless Athabasca Laklabish wishes to get in. Edmonton, Glengarry.
Thank you. For whichever minister is responsible, we see we're going to be feeding elk that normally overwinter in this area, and we're going to end up feeding bighorn sheep that normally overwinter on Mount Allen, and all for Oko's security. I'm wondering why it is that we have to open a highway from December 1st on for security at games that don't start until February, or could it be that they moved the date ahead on us without publicizing it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll try and respond to that question. In the normal practice of keeping... I thought I heard something coming from the mouth of the honourable member. Back to the question. The normal practice of keeping a highway open, whether it's Highway 40 or any highway in the province of Alberta, under any circumstances would be to start at the start of the season and not wait until the heavy snowfalls of what may occur in the region and has historically occurred in the region, where you may be dealing with a 12 to 20 foot depth of snow, that we would keep it open from this point on, and the decision was made to do just that in the interests of providing a number of things, both the public safety of those who would be using the road and others who in fact would be part of the Olympic movement.
Order, please, Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister. Edmonton Calder, followed by Cardston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 1987 has been designated as International Year of Shelter for the Homeless. The Alberta Action Plan for the year consisted primarily of the construction of a few housing units, which are in fact fewer in number than last year. However, homelessness continues to be a serious problem for young people, for battered women, for the poor, mentally ill, and the unemployed. In Edmonton, a coalition consisting of over 30 social service agencies issued a report in May which contains some excellent recommendations. To the Minister of Social Services, as she has had ample opportunity to do something to address this problem of homelessness by implementing some of the recommendations by the coalition, why has she chosen to ignore these recommendations?
Mr. Speaker, it would not be my view that the recommendations have at all been ignored. As I recall, at the time when the information was published, there was a number of facts that were ignored by the people who were speaking to the issue, and it is not that we make light of the issue, but it should be noted that, for instance, on an ongoing basis, there are vacancies in the type of shelter accommodation that is available in Edmonton. Using that as an example, the hostel continually has openings.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. It's obvious the Minister doesn't understand what a complex issue that this really is. As a study done by the Coalition indicates that the main cause of homelessness is lack of income, will the Minister confirm that her department is in fact contributing to homelessness this year by chopping assistance to the single employables, and will she rescind this regressive move?
Mr. Speaker, it is not my view that the policies of the Department or the Minister have contributed to this particular situation. Income has not been identified as one of the areas as a contributing factor, where we have seen people who are homeless, as I've had identified for me. Many of these individuals do not want to jump through any hoops whatsoever and having themselves identified so that they may receive income.
Supplementary to the Minister, we're talking about 16 and 17-year-old kids. As one of the findings of the Coalition was that the Department's policy refusing single employables on social assistance a damage deposit, making it impossible for them to find appropriate housing, has the Minister, or why has the Minister refused to change this policy?
Mr. Speaker, working with young people in our society who are under the age of majority has always been a very controversial area, if nothing else, in that many parents believe that we have contributed to their young people leaving home by virtue of just having programs for them. And it is not a happy situation when, on many occasions, the minister has letters on her desk indicating that we have done just that. And, Mr. Speaker, it is our view that we have a balanced program that offers shelter for young people.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister, despite the fact that the International Year of Shelter for the Homeless is almost at an end, demonstrate some concern, at least, for the homeless by consulting the Coalition and other social service agencies and draw up a plan for her department to begin to address the problem?
Mr. Speaker, there are many organizations and communities around the province, and the honourable member has mentioned a number of them, that do a very excellent job of contributing views from their particular vantage point and offering solutions that they believe to be appropriate. I think it is also true that as we sit in this assembly, on a lot of occasions, the honourable members from the official opposition party often recount their particular style of caring. And we certainly have seen that in Manitoba. And it would be my view, Mr. Speaker, as I look at the statistics and where the government of Manitoba, for instance, ranks people with respect to welfare and shelter allowance, and I see that a single parent with one child receives $100 less a month than the same individual in Alberta, I believe that's appalling.
Vermilion Viking, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Social Services, a supplementary. Unfortunately, in Alberta, there are many children between the ages of 15 and 18 that are from split families or homes that are on social assistance and in the homes of guardians. Do you have any indication in the province today how many of those children are from families that could, or split families, where the parents themselves could well afford to look after those children, but because of the situation that exists, they are not addressing that responsibility, and the province is looking after these in guardian homes?
Mr. Speaker, that is a complicated question in that there are so many situations with respect to individual families. It is true that there are occasions when the department is not able to track down individual parents who indeed have the resources to support their children, and in fact the taxpayers of this province under the Guardian Social Allowance Program have been called on to do that support, but we are doing the very best that we can in an effort to achieve the funding that's available.
Edmonton Gold Bar.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. It now appears evident that the Minister has not sought out the Coalition to discuss the matter. Will the Minister now undertake to tour and review this accommodation firsthand with the Coalition so that she may know what these homeless Albertans and their advocates are facing?
Mr. Speaker, I haven't certainly seen all the accommodation that is available, but I have seen many examples of it, and I don't believe that I need an additional tour.
Member for Cardston, followed by Red Deer North. Cardston.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Community and Occupational Health. Mr. Speaker, there is a growing concern in our province, and I'm sure throughout Canada, for the growing number of AIDS victims. I'd like to ask the Minister what his department is really doing to protect unsuspecting Albertans from this deadly disease.
Mr. Speaker, we announced in late October a comprehensive program for all Albertans that was focused primarily on education,
and caring and providing information, as much information as possible, to the general public, to teachers, to students, to parents, to those in the medical profession, as well as healthcare workers, and as well as information to all Alberta workers who may be exposed, may be vulnerable to the disease and to the virus. I believe that this program, Mr. Speaker, about a $2.2 million program for each of the next 3 years, is a comprehensive one that is going to bring home the danger of the disease to all Albertans, and particularly information on how to prevent acquiring the disease.
Supplementary to the Minister, but to deal with some of the processes that perhaps really need to be in place to accomplish this, why don't you require reporting of positive AIDS blood tests like they do in some of the other provinces?
Mr. Speaker, reporting does occur today. Those Albertans who are found to have the AIDS disease are reported by their doctor to the local medical officer of health, as well to the communicable disease control people. And working in conjunction with the patient, contact tracing is undertaken to make contact with all of those people that person might have had sexual contact with. In the case of those who are found to test positive only and just have the virus, the same procedure is followed. The doctor working with the patient is expected to make contact with all of those individuals with whom that person might have had contact.
Supplementary to the Minister, but apparently you don't make contact tracing a legal requirement. Why is that, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that physicians' good practices are things that we can legislate in this Assembly. Physicians, because of their professional oath, are naturally expected, and I believe live up to those expectations, that they must help their patient and those with whom the patient might have had contact to stop the spread of the disease, to be aware of its dangers, and to make sure that the spread comes to an end.
Final supplementary. What are you doing to prevent AIDS carriers from passing the virus knowingly to others?
Mr. Speaker, I've described the program that we've put in place, and I believe it is a comprehensive program that should go some distance to preventing the further spread. But the ultimate responsibility, Mr. Speaker, and I think all members would agree, it rests with individual Albertans. We will provide the information. We will do all that we can. But the ultimate responsibility rests with each and every one of us. Armed with all of the information that's available, then we must take responsible action.
Thank you. Member for supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar. Edmonton.
Yes.
Okay, and then we'll go from there. Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this line of questioning? Opposed? Carried. Chair recognizes Edmonton Goldbar, followed by Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister please inform the House whether or not he has given a directive and resources to the public health units of the province to undertake an aggressive program of education and information on AIDS, as well as through the STD clinics?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have done precisely that. We have beefed up the resources within the sexually transmitted disease clinics in Edmonton and Calgary, and by providing increased funds to some of the health units, we are going to make available to the community, to teachers, to students and parents, to healthcare workers and professionals, to other groups, to other working groups in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, that are potentially vulnerable to the disease. It's those areas where we're placing our resources and where we believe we can get the best results.
Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member just stole my question, but another one I have has to do with the lack of effort that the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care has been taking on the same issue. One thorny one that's just emerging now is what is the Minister prepared to do for hemophiliacs in Alberta who are exposed to the HIV virus by virtue of being exposed to factor VIII, which is being collected by the Red Cross. Will he be indemnifying them for any damages that they've occurred by being exposed to the HIV virus?
No.
Mr. Speaker, problem that hemophiliacs face and are potentially exposed to is incredible. When one considers the factor VIII drug that is associated with for hemophiliacs, it's a drug that is brought together from numerous blood donors. So the potential for exposure is significant. But we are doing all that we can to prevent those hemophiliacs from being exposed to the virus.
Point of Calgary Milliken.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to rise on a point of privilege. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the legislature established a formal procedure to allow French and other languages to be used in the various proceedings of the Assembly. Well, I did advise the Speaker, your Chair, in advance that I intended to introduce a group of Chinese elderly citizens yesterday. I did not strictly comply with the new procedure under Standing Order 17.1, and I used a different language without giving you the translations or advising in advance. So I realize we've all got to try to get along in here and cooperate, or otherwise we'll have chaos. So I therefore wish to apologize to you, Mr. Speaker, and to all honourable members for my failure to follow the rules established by this Assembly.
Thank you, honourable member. Orders of the day, might we revert briefly to the introduction of special guests?